Morning, everybody. Okay, so this online lesson is about the Enabling Act of the 23rd, 24th of March 1933. Probably the most significant single piece of legislation that Hitler and the Nazi regime were to pass, because it pretty much provided the foundation for Hitler's dictatorship, or certainly it worked hand in hand with the Reichstag fire decree, which we covered last lesson. Anyway, a lot of this lesson, probably about half the slides, provide a recap in one form or another of what we did last lesson, which was the National Uprising election campaign. To a large extent, you, the listener, can control the pace of this. You can choose to pause the video and read, certainly for the first half of the lesson. So we'll just move on, and I'll leave that decision for you. Okay, so that's the first thing. I've written an essay. If you go to the Padlet folder, and also now in Microsoft Teams for our class, you can download, print off this particular essay. I wanted to try to capture all the key points about the National Uprising campaign. I've written an essay for you. So what I'll do is I'll just zoom in, and then you can read particular extracts and just use the pause button on YouTube if you wish. Okay, so there's the introduction. And moving down, so as you can see, I made the point that Hitler rested his hopes on 5 factors, and the essay pretty much focuses in on the 5 factors. He was not campaigning as the leader of an opposition party. And he was able to exploit that position that Hermann Goering had, minister without portfolio in the national government, but the key position in the Prussian state government, Prussian Minister of the Interior. And then the issue of luck. It is a causal factor in history, certainly worth pointing it out. When you're writing history lessons, you can often focus in on the sort of big themes: politics, economics, short-term, long-term. Sometimes history comes down to an astonishing piece of luck, and this is one of the classic examples of luck in history. Fourth thing that helped Hitler: political cunning. The way in which he expertly played the situation. Cloak-and-Dagger Politics. One of those key factors I mentioned is how Hitler was able to pretend he was something he was not. He let the conservatives believe that he was their puppet. And there's the reference there to the Reichstag fire decree that was passed on the 28th of February 1933, a week before the election. Worked hand in hand with the Enabling Act that we'll look at in this lesson. And then finally, that notion of pseudo-legality, dressing everything up as if it was being legal. And one of the key points, which we'll pick up towards the end of this video, is arguably it was within the letter of the Weimar Constitution, what he did, but equally there's a counter-argument that some historians use that what Hitler did was contrary to the spirit of the Weimar Constitution. So one of the big areas of debate is, was the revolution, and it undoubtedly was a revolution because Hitler brought about in an astonishingly short time the end of Weimar democracy, created a dictatorship. Was it legal? Okay, this notion of a legal revolution. So it all culminated then in the actual 5th of March elections. And that's the starting point for these 3 lessons. So lesson 1, in effect, is today's lesson, the Enabling Act. And then the next 2 online lessons will be about Gleichschaltung, the coordination, the power, what Hitler did using the powers of the Enabling Act. But so let's push on. Just a reminder, okay, so important with A-level history. Are you making your knowledge stick? I've referenced a book there, The Science of Successful Learning, Make It Stick. Educational research now shows that deliberate practice, revisiting, and that's the deliberation is you. You have to deliberately revisit to put knowledge into your long-term memory, which is what it's about, and a little bit and often having a clear strategy, going back with flashcards, etc., knowledge retrieval, self-testing. So going back to certainly an opportunity that you have at the moment as we're in lockdown. This video is being recorded just in case I use it again in future years. It's been recorded in the spring of 2020. Great opportunity to be working on those strategies, okay, so that you're fully prepared for when you sit the A-level exam in just over a year's time. And there's the usual big picture, so you can sort of see where we are in the big scheme. So you can see our 3 lessons highlighted there, how they fit into what we've done before, and where we're going to go for the next few lessons that will take us through to the summer holidays. Again, you can pause that. In terms of stretch reading, on the Enabling Act, William Carr is very solid, okay, so the page references are there. And then I talked about that sort of debate. Was there a legal revolution? Were these events that we started with the last lesson, the National Uprising campaign, and we're going to be continuing for this lesson and the next 2 lessons on Gleichschaltung. Wrapped up, that package is really about the revolution, the overthrow of democracy, the apparently legal revolution, or was it? And Stephen J. Lee, you have a scan of that essay, but you've also got my own notes. But read the background narrative, read the essay itself, and then have a look at the sources at the back of the chapter, and think about which of those sources you could incorporate into an essay for that particular question, if you were to get that question. And then to help you even further with that, I have recorded a YouTube video in which I walk and talk you through that essay by Stephen Lee. Okay, was there a legal revolution, 1933 to 34? So the link is on the slideshow and also in the Padlet page for this particular lesson and on Microsoft Teams as well. And the final reading source is take a look at that particular chapter, chapter 5 of Noakes and Pridham's documentary Reader about the rise to power of the Nazis. It's an excellent chapter called The Seizure of Power 1933 to 34. and the whole section 126 to 143, lots of documents, so you can read the documents. It really brings it alive. And again, you may find particular lines in key documents, just make a note of them. You can memorize those particular lines, and that really adds an extra little bit to an essay if you can incorporate a little quote from a key primary source into a document. So that's useful as well. Okay. So again, this bit you can read. I've just jotted down a few points just to recap this story from last lesson, just to bring you back to where we are. So the National Uprising election campaign. Have a quick look at those 5 points, and they continue on to the next slide, so you may want to pause it. Picture there of Hermann Goering, the Minister of the Interior for Prussia. And as you can see, I'm referencing some of those points. There's the point about luck. And it brings to that final point. In spite of everything, the Nazis did not achieve the majority that they needed to uncouple themselves from their coalition partners. The DNVP, the German Nationalist Party, was their coalition partner in Hitler's cabinet. Which brings us to the start of today's lesson proper. So we'll follow the usual format. Okay, we'll begin with the first strand, and again the first strand is largely a recap, but not completely. I'm going to bring in some new material here. So just with the National Uprising campaign. And there's the final picture, the big picture that this video will reach by the end. We'll have covered these points. Okay, so we'll start with the National Uprising campaign and this issue about totalitarianism. Okay, so in a nutshell, I'll just zoom in a little bit on there. Okay, the National Uprising that we covered last lesson was the first stage in a series of events which we can now see culminated by the end of 1934. Get the time frame in your head correct, okay? So we're starting at the beginning of 1933, so we're talking about the best part of 2 years. So by the end of 1934, arguably, and that's the key word because there's a debate about it, Germany had become a totalitarian state. It certainly wasn't a totalitarian state at the beginning of 1933. Hitler was just simply a chancellor within a supposed democracy, okay, the Weimar Republic. But by the end of 1934, the Weimar Republic had ended and Germany was now the Third Reich, okay? Arguably a system of ruling which we call totalitarianism. Okay, so the 5 intertwining characteristics of the National Uprising that we covered last lesson. Okay, and there they are. They're listed there for you, so I won't read them again. All those characteristics became a key feature which underpinned all that happened in 1933 to 34. Okay. So those 5 key features, they're very useful to sort of get your head around, because if you get a question about how did Hitler achieve his dictatorship, how did Hitler create a totalitarian system, you could almost frame your essay around those 5 points. Okay, a paragraph on each, in effect. Okay, so it gives you a structure to your answer, which is why it's worth knowing those 5 points well. We'll come back to those in a minute. Okay. Now, the term totalitarianism, it was originally used in, I think, 1949, after World War II, by a historian called Hannah Arendt. And she wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. And this is a historical term. very much in the context of the Cold War, which originated in the year in which the book was written. A great deal of interest after World War II, after the demise of Hitler and the fall of Hitler's Germany, when there was a recognition that in the first half of the 20th century, countries such as Hitler's Germany, the Soviet Union and Italy had, out of the ferment of World War One, had created one-party dictatorships in their countries. And the term was coined that these were totalitarian systems. Okay. Now the definition of that term, totalitarian one, is a complex one. Okay. It's very easy, because you see the word total in there, to take a simplistic view that a totalitarian system means total control. And to some extent, that is what it means, but it is more than that. It's more nuanced than that. There's a lot of debate by historians, different interpretations of what it means. I mean, Hannah Arendt wrote a whole book about it, about what totalitarianism means. And that debate goes so far that some historians even argue that Nazi Germany was actually not a totalitarian state, certainly in the true sense of whatever that word means. So again, that's an area of debate, and it's something potentially you could get an essay question on for Depth Study 3. You know, was Nazi Germany a totalitarian state? I mean, it's a lovely question if you get that, because it gives you so much you can talk about. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. As a recap, the 5 underlying features, there they are. Okay, so we picked up each of these points when we did the National Uprising, and they don't suddenly stop. They continue throughout the events of 1933 into 34. So when we're doing the lessons on Gleichschaltung, you'll see these 5 features. When we do the lessons about the problem of the SA and the Night of the Long Knives that happened in June 1934, you'll see these 5 features. And that's why I say you could almost take these 5 features and use it as a framework for writing an essay. So the political violence that was there throughout, the use of propaganda, in a sense, that's the stick and the carrot, those 2 things, to move Germany forwards. Okay, the constant pretense of legality, the way in which Hitler needed the backers in the conservative establishment, the people who put him into power in the first place, at the top levels of the civil service and the top levels of the army in particular, and how Hitler was able to use them. So that intertwines with Hitler's political cunning. But how his backers miscalculated. They thought they were using him, but in fact Hitler was playing them along. Okay, so those are all sort of key features. Okay, and there's one of the definitions of totalitarianism. The historian Carl Friedrich, I've used because he sort of defined totalitarianism as 6 features. And as I say, Nazism in Germany was seen to be very similar to fascist Italy, which was another extreme form of right-wing authoritarianism, and the Soviet Union, which, although on the other end of the spectrum, because it was extreme left-wing, was nevertheless extreme, and so had these features as well. So the point is, a totalitarian system, nice little definition, that a country that's a totalitarian state, according to Carl Friedrich, there is an official ideology. Okay, there is a single party, it's a one-party system, but it is a mass party. In other words, it has mass support, but it organises the people of the country into mass organisations. So we will, with Hitler, talk about things such as the Hitler Youth, the German Workers' Front, and so on and so forth. Okay, as a means of harnessing the energy, the popular support for the movement, and then harnessing that into large organisations as a means of controlling the people. The police having extreme powers that heighten their control in a way which could be regarded as being terroristic. In other words, fear. So you've got those twin things working there, the carrot and the stick. The official ideology, the propaganda, the mass organisations, that's about consent, that's about the positive side of it, that's about ensuring that the people actively support the regime, not through fear, but because they genuinely believe in the successes of the system, through control over the media, etc. And the police is the sort of stick side of it, that if you don't follow, then you will fall victim to the apparatus of a police state. And all that would mean is in Hitler's Germany, it was, of course, the concentration camps. In Soviet Union, it was the gulags, and so on. And then another feature is the media. When you're a totalitarian state, there is no... you don't have, like in a democracy where you've got multiple forms of media, many newspapers, privately owned, each presenting their own particular point of view, etc., etc. In a totalitarian state, the state has monopolistic control over all forms of media. So there's one party line that is put across. The news is effectively controlled by the state. Okay, so you don't have any choice in terms of what news source to go to. The state has full control over the army. Okay, so the national army is controlled by the ruling party. Now that one in particular is one of the arguments, those historians who would argue that the Nazi regime does not fit the true definition of totalitarianism would say for that particular reason that arguably the German army, throughout the 12 years that Hitler was in control, the German army continued to be independent of Nazi control. Now, was it? That's an area which we'll be talking about. And centralised control over the economy. And again, put an asterisk there again for that one. That's another argument you could say didn't really apply to Nazi control, to Nazism in quite the same way as, for example, the Soviet Union. But it's a debate, okay? So that sort of idea of how many historians have challenged that interpretation of how well it actually applies to Nazi Germany. So there is a debate there, and that's good, because if you get a question about totalitarianism for this particular depth study, you want to be able to debate. It's not a single answer to that question. There are different points of view. Okay, so there is our first strand of the four. Let's get in now to the sort of the chronology of what then happened. Okay. Leading up to the passing of the Enabling Act. So next steps. Quite a big section here, so let's just zoom in on it. Okay. So again, you can pause the video if you wish, but I will provide a commentary for this page. So Hitler had no intention of leading Germany in a conventional way. Okay. Arguably, you could say, well, he only got 44% of the seats in the elections of 5th of March 1933. Therefore, Hitler was disappointed because he was aiming for the 50%. Well, arguably, it wasn't really about getting the 50%, because even if Hitler had achieved 50%, which would have meant that he would have been able to pass laws through the Reichstag, that's not really what he wanted to happen. What he wants to do is to be able to pass laws without even using the Reichstag. Okay, so he doesn't want to be a conventional leader. Every time he passes a law, he goes to the Reichstag, there's a vote, and the lawmaking is passed that way. Okay, he has, since 1920, since he joined the Nazi Party, he has become accustomed to the way he works within the party, where he makes the decisions by himself. He now needs to transfer that method of rule that he's accustomed to within his own party to the way in which he will rule the whole of Germany. So he has no intention of leading Germany in a conventional way. Okay, in other words, no intention of trying to pass laws through the Reichstag by getting a majority vote. Okay, he can't do it anyway because the Nazis only got 44% of the seats in the 5th of March elections, which basically meant he's really back. It hasn't really changed things that much because he's still got to basically work within a coalition cabinet. And remember, his main coalition partner in that cabinet is the DNVP, the German Nationalist Party. Also, that conventional style of working is too slow. It takes too long. Okay, every time he's got to pass a law, he's got to draft a bill, take it to the Reichstag, and they've got to vote on it. And then he begins the process again with another law. He's not interested in that. Hitler wants to be able to pass laws swiftly. And also, again, he's going to have his power weakened because every time he wants to pass a law, he's got to negotiate and talk it through with his coalition partner, the German nationalists. And they're going to say, well, you've got 44% of the seats. To get the 50%, you're going to have to get members of the German Nationalist Party to vote with you, and we will want something in return. So probably the law is going to get watered down anyway. So Hitler wanted total power. Okay, in other words, he wants to be able to pass laws by himself without this, as Hitler would say it, this nonsense that a democracy imposes on him of having to take his law to the representatives elected by the people. Okay, go to the Reichstag. So that really is a sort of definition of what he's working towards. He needs to be enabled to pass laws by himself, and that's really what the Enabling Act is. But how can he do this? How can he achieve this without breaking the terms of the Weimar Constitution? Okay, well, one solution is Article 48, which we've already covered. Now, just to recap, Article 48 was that provision that was written into the Weimar Constitution that said that if there was in effect a hung parliament, okay, if a chancellor can't pass laws through the Reichstag because his party doesn't have a majority of the seats, and let's say he can't build a coalition that will work with him, so basically laws can't be passed. Article 48 said that the Chancellor could pass laws bypassing the Reichstag, ignoring it, and instead going straight to the President. And that lawmaking, where you get the President to sign off a law, you ignore the Reichstag, results in a special type of law called a presidential decree. And ever since 1930, since the beginning of the Great Depression, basically most laws had been passed by presidential decree. Chancellor Brüning, who was the main chancellor during the first 2 years of the Great Depression, habitually did that. Okay, so arguably democracy had broken down anyway since 1930, and lawmaking had been done using Article 48. But the point is, Hitler could use Article 48. After all, Brüning had done it before him, then von Papen had done it, and then Schleicher had done it. But Hitler doesn't want to use Article 48 to govern Germany because that would make him dependent on the support of President Hindenburg. Okay, so in a sense you've got to sort of imagine, I'll just write CH for Chancellor, and the Chancellor is squeezed. Below you've got the Reichstag, okay, the Parliament, which is what normal lawmaking says the Chancellor should use. But if he can't use the Reichstag, he can go up to the President, the head of state, which Hitler could use. But Hitler doesn't want to use them either. Hitler wants to use just himself and his cabinet to govern Germany. Okay, so he wants to be free of it. So how can he do that? Well, fortunately, written into the Weimar Constitution, way down the list of terms of the Constitution, was Article 76. And Article 76 provided a way out of the problem for Hitler, because what Article 46 said is that if Hitler, if the Chancellor can get 2/3 of the Reichstag, and 2/3 is 67% basically, to approve of it, and when I say it is basically a bill. If the Chancellor presents a bill, a draft law, to the Reichstag, requesting the Reichstag to change the Constitution, then a constitutional change would be legal. But because changing the Constitution is such a significant thing that it needed not the normal, which is 50% of the vote, it needed 2/3 of the vote. And the constitutional change that Hitler was looking to make was a special law that would give him permission to pass laws in future by himself without having to go to the Reichstag below him or the president above him. And that's basically what Article 76 said. So read through that again. Just make sure you internalise and you understand that point. And there is our same points really, just in bullet point format. So the Nazis only had 44% of the seats. To pass laws, they were dependent on the coalition partner. Okay, so there, here, on the graph is the 44%. The DMVP next to them have 8%. So 44 plus 8 equals 52. So those two parties between them, that was Hitler's cabinet. But it basically meant that the DMVP had a huge amount of power, because they could at every turn make it difficult for Hitler by saying, oh, I'm not sure we want to vote for that law. What are you going to give us in return? And Hitler doesn't want to be tied into that. But what Hitler needs is to present an enabling law to the Reichstag to change the constitution, and that's Article 76. But that needs a 2/3 vote. So again, do the maths, have a look, but basically, which political party does Hitler need to pass an enabling law? He needs to get the next party on the spectrum, the ZP, the Centre Party, to work with him. The KPD have already been announced as enemies of the state. Okay, so the Reichstag fire decree, passed a week earlier, remember, gave Hitler the power to basically arrest the communists and at will, without trial. Now, they were not enemies of the state, but that was part of the ruse. They were presented as enemies of the state that were plotting to overthrow the state. So Hitler can basically effectively say the communists cannot vote. Okay, they will not be allowed to enter the Reichstag to vote. The SPD clearly will vote against an enabling act, because an enabling act would be used by Hitler to turn against all forces on the political left. But if Hitler can win over the ZP for that, then that was be a way through, and that is our next stage of our story. Okay, so that's that. We're now halfway through, and we now move to the so-called Day of Potsdam. Now, what was this? Okay, so in context, The Reichstag is burnt down. Hitler needs to get the Reichstag to vote for enabling act. So first practical problem is he needs to find another building to act as the Reichstag. Okay, so that's obviously just a practical problem. They identified a building in Berlin, in the suburb of Berlin, called Potsdam. Okay, so Potsdam was the sort of old home of the old emperors. It was symbolically very important and historical. Much of the great Prussian history centered on that region called Potsdam, just outside Berlin. And the building, the Day of Potsdam was basically a ceremonial event, was arranged for the 21st of March. And it was a ceremony to celebrate the reopening of the Reichstag. And the building that would be used as the temporary Reichstag until the real Reichstag was rebuilt, was the Kroll Opera House in Berlin. Okay, so it was a ceremony held. It was actually held in the Potsdam Garrison Church on the 21st of March. And notice the date, 21st of March, because 2 days later the new Reichstag would open, and the first business of the new Reichstag would be to vote on this enabling bill. So clearly Hitler is going to use the ceremonial reopening of the Reichstag as an occasion to get his key messages across, with particularly the German Nationalist Party and the Catholic Centre Party in mind, but also President Hindenburg. Okay, so what are the key points? Let's just have a look at them in a nutshell. So Hitler needed to persuade the German nationalists, remember the previous graph, the DNVP, and the Catholic Centre Party, the ZP, to support the Nazis in the Reichstag. So that was the previous graph that we looked at on the slide before. Okay, because the votes of those three parties between them would give Hitler the 2/3 of the votes needed to pass an enabling law. Okay, working on the basis that the communists would not be allowed to vote. Okay, how do you persuade these two parties to vote for you? Okay, well, we talked about the carrot and the stick, and in a sense, the Day of Potsdam, this event on the 21st of March, was the carrot. Okay, hopefully they will vote for this law because they want to vote for the law, because you're going to make them feel this is the right thing to do. But as a backup, if we don't quite convince them, there will be a stick. There will be the terror. And the terror is what happened 2 days later. But it works hand in hand with the carrot. Okay? So the carrot bit, and don't use the words carrot and stick in an essay, I'm just using that to help you understand it, was the Day of Potsdam. And this was the day in which a new temporary Reichstag building was opened in Berlin. And as I say, they had a ceremony in the Potsdam Garrison Church on the edge of Berlin to sort of celebrate that. So the message that Hitler successfully conveyed on the Day of Potsdam was that this new Germany, led by Hitler and the Nazis, that is now being born, and it started a week earlier with the Reichstag fire decree, was in fact marking the restoration of the old Germany. Okay, so he's saying, look, there are big changes happening, but don't be worried about these big changes, because actually what we're doing here is we're turning the clock back to the days before 1918, okay, when Germany had been an empire. And of course the German word for empire is Reich, and the Germany of 1817 to 1918 was the Second Reich. So Hitler, therefore, now is talking of his new Germany as being the Third Reich, okay, the Third German Empire. What's very clear is that it is no longer a republic, that the 14 years that started in 1919, that culminated in Hitler becoming Chancellor, are now wiped from the record. They were shameful years, the years when Germany was a republic. So what he's doing is he is, in this ceremony, pushing the message that the Nazis are restoring the values of the past. Okay? Who's he targeting that message at? Well, he's targeting that message at the conservative establishment, the people who put him into power, the people of the Second Reich. The Eber-Gruner Pact of November 1918. Remember, the Republic never got rid of the Prussian Junker families who were kept on in the senior positions in the civil service and the army and the judiciary and education. These people who should have been removed when Germany became a republic in 1919, because, let's face it, the Conservatives were not really supporters of the Republic, who pretended to support the Republic, but at heart they didn't. They put Hitler into power, and now that Hitler is in power, Hitler is sending a message to them: I'm giving you the power back. But he wasn't really giving them the power back. That's all part of the pretense. Make these people feel good about what is happening. Okay? So the Conservatives, and also the middle classes, okay, in general, many of whom were the voters for the Catholic Centre Party. And certainly many of the middle classes voted for the German Nationalist Party. Hitler needed to deeply impress them. Don't be worried. You may be seeing violence on the streets, but the violence is being used against the enemies of the middle classes. The violence is being used against the communists. It's not being used against you, the middle classes. We're doing all this to help you. Okay, so it's the message that's being put across is Hitler's Germany is all about giving back, giving real power over to the middle classes and to the conservative establishment. Now, why was he saying all this? He was saying this largely because 2 days later he needed their vote. Okay, that was pretty much what it was about. It was about impressing them. Okay, to secure their vote. So, the details. Okay, and there's some useful additional information here. Okay, so let's just pick them out. So it was a staged event, staged by Joseph Goebbels in the Potsdam Garrison Church. Okay, to commemorate the opening of the new Reichstag. Very much planned with the passing of an enabling law in mind that would happen 2 days later. And it was deliberately staged to appeal to the conservative elites and the middle classes, but also to President Hindenburg, because Hindenburg, of course, is the ultimate conservative elite. Okay, and Hitler, again, very much in the back of his mind, knew that Hindenburg never really liked Hitler. Okay, Hindenburg, the top junker, so to speak, the president, the head of state, who symbolised the values of the Weimar Republic, the great war hero from World War I. He had never really been. He was an old man, but he could see through Hitler. But other conservatives like von Papen had persuaded Hindenburg to make Hitler Chancellor. So it's all part of that ruse of sending a message. And look at that. Look at the photograph there. Look at the way in which Hitler is behaving. He is bowing his head to the ancient field marshal, sending a message out: I am working for you. I'm going to basically give me the powers so I can pass laws by myself, and I will basically turn Germany back to the way it was, working for you. Okay, but the message is clearly there that I am your puppet. And even the way Hitler dressed, look, he's not wearing his brown Nazi Party uniform, which is how he normally dressed. He's he actually dressed in a very conservative style, wearing a dark blue suit. So he's even dressing himself up as being a conservative in the way in which he presented himself. And let's go back to the text, okay? Full of symbols, therefore, this particular day. It was timed to coincide with the anniversary of the opening of the first Reichstag in 1871. So the date, the 21st of March, was the anniversary way back, 1871, when Bismarck opened the very first Reichstag. So symbolic. It's like we're turning the clock back to the Second Reich. Okay, the venue, the tomb of the Prussian King Frederick the Great. So the Prussian city of Potsdam, all sending out those signals that the Nazi regime are giving the power back to the Prussians. Even the ceremony was very, very symbolic. As we say, Hitler dressed conservatively. And looking at the picture there, it was in a church. It was very much like a wedding ceremony. On one side of the church stood Hitler, and on the other side of the church stood Hindenburg, and they shook hands. And like a marriage, the side of the church that Hitler stood on, behind him, all of the pews in the church were filled with Nazi stormtroopers, and the side of the church that Hindenburg stood on, the pews were filled with representatives of the conservative establishment. In the same way as in a church, you have the bride's family on one side and the groom's family on the other. And so, like a wedding, which becomes the symbolic joining of two families, the Day of Potsdam was the symbolic union of the old Germany, in other words, the Germany pre-1918, with the new Germany represented by this dynamic, new, young Nazi regime that presented itself as restoring the values of the old Germany. So what that symbolic handshake did is it wiped out the 14 shameful years of the Weimar Republic, which is how Hitler portrayed those 14 years. So the Day of Potsdam was therefore deliberately reassuring the conservative elites, who included, of course, the two political parties, the DMVP and the ZP, whose vote Hitler desperately needed to secure the 2/3 that he needed. So it was very much with an eye on the vote 2 days later in mind. So there we are on that Day of Potsdam. So we've got one more strand to finish off the lesson, and that is the actual passing of the Enabling Act. What then happened 2 days later? Okay. So, zoom in. In a nutshell, okay, 2 days later, 23rd of March, Hitler presented the Enabling Bill to the Reichstag. Now, the Day of Potsdam was the carrot. That was all the positive messages, okay? So hopefully the German nationalists and the Catholic Centre Party, when they entered the voting chamber, have gone some way to deciding, yes, we will vote for this law. But Hitler knew that the vote could waver, okay? Particularly the Catholic Centre Party, okay? So a little bit of extra is needed, and that's the stick. So when they went to the chamber, the voting chamber, the chamber was surrounded by Nazi stormtroopers. So it was not a free, open vote. The message was, the stormtroopers are watching you vote. Okay? And if you don't vote for the Enabling Act, then take the consequences, was the hidden message. Now, the communists, the KPD, because they were declared enemies of Germany, see previous lesson, we did that last lesson, the National Uprising campaign, Hitler had the powers, through the Reichstag fire decree, to not even allow them to enter the voting chamber. Many communists had been arrested in the first week of March 1933. And now, by the 23rd of March, sort of like the concentration camps are being set up. And so many of the Communist Party has declared enemies of Germany, who rightfully by law should have been allowed to vote that day. And there again is part of the, is it legal? Extremely dubious, because strictly speaking, the communists, the members of the party who had seats in the Reichstag should have been allowed to turn up to vote. But the Reichstag fire decree arguably gave Hitler the power to have them arrested. So that's kind of sorts out that aspect of the vote. But of course, the Social Democratic Party, the moderate left, now there was no way they were going to accept an enabling bill, which would give Hitler the powers to run Germany by himself, because Hitler, obviously clearly nationalistic, not internationalistic, clearly working with an agenda of the far right, not left wing, is clearly going to use his powers against the socialists. So the Democratic Party bravely voted against the bill. Okay, and that was a brave vote, because at the end of the vote, when they walked out of the chamber, many of them were immediately picked up by Hitler's police and were sent into the concentration camps. Okay, they could have, if they wanted to save their own skins, have voted for the bill, but they bravely, almost to a man, voted against the bill. But that didn't worry Hitler, because Hitler knew that as long as he got obviously the Nazis are going to vote for it, and the German nationalists, because they are Hitler's main coalition partner, are going to vote for it. But if he can persuade the wavering Centre Party to vote for it, then it doesn't matter that the SPD are not voting for it. Okay, and there is our key thing. The Centre Party, who, although uncertain, were won over by the Day of Potsdam message. And they were, if there was any doubt in their minds, most of the Centre Party members of the Reichstag were family men, and they kind of thought, well, yeah, I've got a responsibility to provide for my family. If I vote against this, I will probably end up in prison, in a concentration camp, and my own family would be at risk. That was kind of the self-justification that was going on. And we know that because many of the members of the Centre Party afterwards, when they saw what Hitler was really like and what Hitler was really using his powers to do, they attempted to sort of justify why they voted for it. And many of the members of the Centre Party said it was really out of self-preservation. So Hitler got his 2/3. The enabling bill became the enabling law, and the next day, the 24th of March, it was published as the Enabling Act. An act is simply same. It's a law. Okay, so the Constitution had now changed, because what the enabling law did, and we'll just cover this in the next point, is it authorised Hitler for 4 years to pass laws by himself without the need to obtain the approval of the Reichstag or the president. So the Constitution has been changed. Hitler can pass laws by himself without the Reichstag, but also without the president. Article 48 allowed the Chancellor to pass laws with presidential signature, but this is bigger than Article 48. This is about passing laws by himself without either the Reichstag or the president's support. So the law provided the legal basis for Hitler's dictatorship. Now notice how it said it was only actually valid for 4 years. 4 years later, in 1938, on the 24th of March 1938, when the 4 years expired, nobody noticed, because basically by that point Hitler had shaped Germany into what he wanted, a powerful police state, no form of criticism allowed, so nobody basically dared raise the point in 1938 that the 4-year term of the Enabling Act had expired. So basically there again is an issue about was it really legal? Okay, if it was truly legal, then Hitler would have suspended it in 1938 and Germany would have reverted back to being a democracy, but that never happened. Okay, so Hitler had achieved the aim that he had set himself 10 years earlier. Remember, he set himself that aim when he was in jail following the Munich Putsch. Hitler changed his strategy, and his strategy was to achieve power legally and to bring about the end of the Weimar Republic legally. So he couldn't do it, he couldn't bring about the end of the Republic by a violent act from outside. He needed to work his way into power and then within the terms of the constitution legally bring about a revolution by exploiting the loopholes. And that loophole was Article 76 and also, of course, Article 48. So strictly speaking, he did arguably bring about a legal revolution because he was using Article 76 and Article 48 before that. But many historians argue that this so-called legal revolution was not legal. Why? Because, yes, Hitler may have followed the letter of the constitution, but because at every step there was the threat of violence. Yeah, we talked about the stormtroopers standing around the inside of the voting chamber, but also remember that highly dubious event beforehand where 50,000 SA had been given an armband and had been allowed to become members of the police. The way in which he had duped Hindenburg to sign in the Reichstag fire decree. The intention was that would only be used against the communists, but now Hitler was using it against whoever he disagreed with. Hitler was not following the spirit of the Constitution. He was using the Constitution against the Constitution. So that's, I think, an important phrase to use. So in that sense, the revolution he achieved was illegal. So for that, I would definitely go to the Stephen J. Lee essay that I referred to at the beginning, which talks that through. And maybe you've got a separate YouTube video in which I'll walk and talk you through the key points of the Stephen J. Lee essay. But that is probably the most likely question that you could get in the exam if you get a question about the so-called revolution of 1933, which brought about the end of the Weimar Republic. So again, there's the details. Okay, there's our vote. It was those three parties, basically. The brave SPD voted against it, knowing that if it was passed, that would mark not just the end of their party, but effectively the end of their own free lives. And many of the SPD members who voted against the enabling bill on that day were arrested within the next day or week. And those who were not arrested fled. They fled abroad out of self-preservation. But we'll do more on that. Okay. So have a look at the point. So the points there met on the 23rd of March. That's what the bill proposed. Hitler would have the power to pass laws without having to present them to the Reichstag. The KPD, 81 of them, couldn't even vote because they were not allowed to attend because they were in concentration camps. The Centre Party was the key party, the Catholic Centre Party. They voted for it. Hitler's vice-chancellor, our friend von Papen, was a strong supporter of Hitler's dictatorship and was a member of he was a Catholic, so his position was important there. And they convinced themselves, because it was time framed to last just 4 years, what could be the harm? Give him the powers for 4 years. He can use those powers to strengthen Germany, sort out the political left. That will help the Catholics and it will help the middle classes, etc. But there was fear. Many members of the Catholic Centre Party knew and understood that this was not a good thing for Germany, that effectively the Nazis were not really restoring the good old traditional values of the past, that they were gangsters with a much more sinister agenda. So those are the key points there. The SPD, 94 of them out of the 120, were very brave. Their leader, Otto Wels, spoke out against the Enabling Act in spite of that intimidation and the ranks of the SA around the chamber. Very, very brave thing to do. But they knew for history that it was important to speak out for future generations that there were people who did not agree with this. So the vote was passed. Interestingly, although the Reichstag is no longer needed for lawmaking, it was not abolished. Hitler kept it going. Okay, we'll do this in the next couple of lessons. We'll look at how Hitler used the powers of the Enabling Act to pass laws that basically dissolved the other political parties. But the Reichstag continued to meet, but with just one party in it, the Nazi Party. But he still kept it going. Okay, it made the Reichstag an irrelevance. It's no longer needed to pass laws, but Hitler, every 30th of January, to celebrate the anniversary of him becoming Chancellor, would always go to the Reichstag and give a big speech. Okay, so that sort of a notion of it being a representative body that represented the views of the people, Hitler used that as an event, annual event, to give a big speech. So Hitler later ignored the 4-year lifespan. So by 1937, Nazi control had been so strengthened that no one dared or even thought to make the point, because it, strictly speaking, the 23rd of March 1937, apologies, I think I said 38 earlier, but it was 37, the Enabling Act expired, but nobody actually dared point that out. Okay, so there is, as you can see, published in Berlin, 24th of March 1933, the key articles of the Enabling Act, which you can read. Okay, so there we are. Our lesson is completed, the passing of the Enabling Act and why that was important. So the next lesson will be a double lesson. There's a lot to cover. It's called Gleichschaltung, which is the German word for coordination. But basically what this is about is how Hitler used the powers given to him by the Enabling Act in an astonishingly swift, brief period of time over the summer of 1933 to pretty much centralise much of the control of German life in Hitler's hands. Okay, so Gleichschaltung will be our next lesson. I'll sign off there. Thank you very much.